Good morning. My name is Doug DeSilvio. Today I'm at a commercial multifamily project. I'm here with our technician from our company, Alejandro Escorza. Today we're going to be doing a job hazard analysis, or a JHA, for the scope of caulking brick control joints. You can see the elevation behind me that we're going to be working on. To access this work, we have to go up about 20 feet. And we'll be using a 60-foot straight boom lift. The first thing that we'll do is a daily huddle. We'll get together, we'll get our crew together, and we'll explain the scope of work and the different steps and the tasks that we have to perform. When we first get here, we want to make sure that we have the correct trained personnel. So Alejandro, the rest of our company members, they have an ID badge that identifies who they are, their expertise is, technician, and on the back we have a QR code. That QR code, if I scan that with my smartphone, which I will do, will give me all of his training records to make sure that we have the right employee trained for the equipment that he's about to use. So simply I can go to my QR reader, I can scan this code, I don't know if you can see that, very small, but it brings up all of his trainings. Fall protection, boom lift, scaffolding, sealants, waterproofing. So it gives me all of his training information at a snapshot, which is on a web-based server. I also want to check to make sure that if he is operating a boom lift, that he has his boom lift certification card with him. So if you have your boom lift certification card, okay. So this is certificate of completion. This is from one of our equipment manufacturers, distributors. He has scissor lift and boom lift training that was issued on February 6th of 2015. Lists the trainer's name, and it lists Alejandro Escorza as the operator. So this is valid, this is good. Thank you. So we have the right person to operate the boom lift. This is a coordination point at this point. All of this area behind me, we have to access. We're going to access the boom lift on this flat grade here, which is great. It's a nice flat, even surface. That's what we're looking for. At this point, we believe we have to coordinate with our general contractor, but we believe the concrete is going to be placed first. We'll have to wait for the appropriate cure time before we can drive the boom lift on it. So what we have left on this elevation, if you want to pan in, Joey, we have brick control joints all the way up, about 20 feet to where the plaster system is. Okay, so where the plaster meets the brick there, that's what we're going to be completing. We've got this whole elevation to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the different steps for the scope of work that we have. Number one, we're going to be using a silicone sealant material that comes in a 2-gallon unit. Okay, we're going to be using an open cell backer rod with that, and there's going to be some prep that is required prior to doing the work. So what we'll do is we'll first start off with a scraper. Okay, we'll scrape the inside of the joint. We'll wire brush, and then we'll take a chip brush and we'll clean out all the dust and all the debris out of the joint. Okay, once we have all the joint completely clean and free of all maintenance and dust and debris, the next step that we'll do is pack the backer rod. Once the backer rod is packed to the right depth, we'll install the silicone sealant. Once the silicone sealant is installed, we'll tool a joint, and that'll be the end of the installation. So when you start off with a job hazard analysis, first to find out what the access equipment was, we've got the right person trained. You look at the access of this elevation. We have a pretty safe access away from all the power lines. So the power lines behind us, within about 30 feet, so we're more than good, because we're going to be working parallel to the building, so that's not going to be a concern. So the first task that we have to do with the caulking scope is scraping the joint. Right, so after we know we've got to use a scraper and we have to clean the joint out, since it is a rough surface, it is brick, we want to make sure that we wear some type of hand protection, right? So Alejandro has his gloves on, he's got hand protection to keep his hands away from that brick joint so he's not scraping and rasping his hands. So we have hand protection. On a normal job site you want your PPE, so this job site requires a hard hat, safety glasses, a safety vest, and work boots, which he has. So he's got the basic PPE plus hand protection. After the cleaning of the joint is done, we'll pack the backer rod. Right? If you use a knife, use cut-resistant gloves to protect your hand from lacerations, which these are also cut-resistant gloves. If you don't use a knife, then you can simply break the backer rod material, but it's always recommended to cut that with a knife. After that backer rod is installed, the next step that we have is to shoot the sealant. Once the sealant is shot at the proper bead, we'll go back with the tool and tool the sealant. Alright, so really it's just material contact is the hazard that I see with installing material. Alright, so we'll have hand protection, just a regular cotton all-purpose glove that we'll wear just to make sure we're not getting sealants on our hands. But obviously the most dangerous thing that we have, the biggest hazard that we have is using an aerial boom lift, is using the equipment. Right, we'll protect ourselves with basic PPE for the rest of the scope, but making sure that he's properly trained, he understands how to use the boom lift, and we have safe and level access is the biggest hazard that we have today. And this is the proper way to do a job hazard analysis prior to starting this type of work. Thank you. Here is a sample of a job hazard analysis report. Notice at the top that the general information that's needed would be your company name, project name and number, and you identify what task is the job that you're performing. In this case, it's brick control joint sealants. What is the task description of the work? There's 5 different tasks which involve prepping and cleaning the joint, backer rod installation, sealant installation, and tooling the sealant. The person completing the JHA, the issue date, which is the date that the JHA was filled out, and then after the JHA is completely finished, you'll have to have it approved by either the general contractor or a supervisor. So the steps that would be involved with the brick control joint sealants, step 1, which we've identified as access to work, or the access equipment that's required for the work, will be using a 60-foot aerial boom lift. What are the potential safety and health hazards with the access? There were 3. The employee and the operator need to be properly trained, and the recommended control for that would be verify that the employee has current and valid boom lift operator training and that the card is present on the employee. The second hazard for the access are falls to lower levels. The recommended controls for that: to verify the employee has been properly trained in fall protection and a full body harness with the 3-foot restraint and 6-foot shock lanyards that will be inspected and worn while they're working. And the last identified safety or health hazard for the access is struck by from overhead work. And a recommended control for that would be to barricade around the aerial boom lift with caution tape to inform other subcontractors of overhead work. The second step for brick control joint sealants is to prep the brick control joints. Typically that's used with a scraper or a 5-in-1 tool and a wire brush. Some of the potential safety and health hazards: abrasions or cuts to the hand. And the recommended control for that would be to wear leather or cut-resistant gloves when scraping or wire brushing joints to prevent skin contact on rough masonry surfaces. The third step after prepping the brick control joint would be to clean them. That's typically done with a chip brush. Again, abrasions and cuts to the hand are your hazards, and the same control would be to wear leather or cut-resistant gloves when cleaning out to prevent that skin contact on the rough surface. The fourth step installing open cell backer rod into the joint. Since you have to use a knife, cuts to the hand would be the identified hazard, and again, the control method would be to wear cut-resistant gloves when installing the open cell backer rod. And it is recommended to cut the backer rod to the appropriate length with a knife. So when using the knife, the cut-resistant gloves must be worn to help prevent lacerations or cuts to the hand. The fifth step, install the silicone sealant. This will be done with a bulk caulk gun out of a 2-gallon unit of silicone material. The hazard identified there is material contact to the skin, and a control method would be wearing cotton all-purpose gloves to protect the hands from material contact. And lastly, the final step of the actual installation would be tooling the sealant. Again, material contact is a hazard. To wear the all-purpose gloves and to protect the hands from material contact would be your control method. At the end of the day, we're going to have to clean our tools. To properly clean the tools, you do have to use a solvent. So there are hazards, 2 listed here with using a solvent. One would be poor ventilation. To control that hazard, you should only use the toluene solvent to clean caulking tools outside or in areas where there's plenty of ventilation. This should not be used inside the building. And the second hazard identified with cleaning your tools is that chemical contact to the skin when using that toluene solvent material. So your control method for that would be to wear neoprene, chemical resistant or impervious gloves when using the toluene solvent to clean your caulking tools. After you have identified all the proper steps in performing that scope of work, the most important thing at the end is to go over this with the crew that's going to be doing the installation, so they know all the hazards associated with the work and what control methods are required. And you can see at the bottom of the form that there's an acknowledgement signature line. Any of the employees that are going to be working on that scope need to sign this to verify that they fully understand it. And that's the proper way of filling out a job hazard analysis.